I can remember on one such occasion with a group of missionaries, probably about 100 missionaries in this magnificent city of Brisbane in Australia. A missionary asked to Elder Scott, one of our apostles, a very deep, deep question. A difficult question, I thought. A profound question, I thought. And I also thought, I'm really glad it's not me that has to answer the question, because he was addressing it to Elder Scott, who was addressing the missionaries. Elder Scott looked at the missionary, paused for a moment, and simply said, Elder Sabrowski will answer that question. I suppose I should have prayed a little longer that morning. Well, at the invitation of a prophet, seer, and revelator, I stood, thinking as fast as I could, what would the Lord have me say? And two thoughts came into mind. One thought was the answer to the question. The other thought was a thought of fear. And so I led with the thought of fear, and I simply said, I think I know the answer to that question, and I have an opinion about what that answer is. But if my opinion differs from Elder Scott's opinion, then I said to all of the missionaries, then his opinion immediately becomes my opinion. I just wanted to make sure I covered my bases. So if Elder Scott got up and corrected me, my opinion would immediately be his opinion. Isn't that the way of the gospel? Don't we all have opinions? Until those whom we sustain have a different opinion. And when they have a different opinion, then our opinions become their opinions.
It will now read the purpose of the church history department rather than the purpose of church history. It's really the purpose of our department is to help God's children make and keep sacred covenants. There are some purists among us who wonder why we're referencing covenants, wondering why of all the things that we might be trying to bring about in the church, we choose this, and why does our labor in church history have a more direct relationship to covenants than other parts of the gospel. And really, you could make a defense and an argument probably for various things that we might want to accomplish at the very highest level. But when you think about it, brothers and sisters, there's really nothing more fundamental about our gospel than the covenants that we make. Really. On the day when we kneel at Jesus' feet, if we've kept those covenants, then everything is encompassed in that accomplishment. And if we haven't, then everything else really pales in significance anyway. And in an order of priority, these are the people that we serve, the general authority and general auxiliary leaders of the church. We drop everything when they call and try to meet their needs. That's as it should be for this department. But their needs aren't great. Sometimes there's an occasional rush job, but they don't place an undue burden on us. And then our next priority is to serve the members of the church, the household of faith, and then the scholars. And yes, we do want to be respectable and have scholarly stature and be respected and accepted and well regarded in that community. But this is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's not a university. It's not an academic institution. This isn't our first line of service. Though to have credibility, we have to be respectable scholars. But they are of secondary importance to us. Other people can serve their needs probably better than we can often. So we need to keep this straight in our minds, and it helps us know how to allocate our resources and where to spend our time. And then lastly, there may be others outside the church and inside the church that fit into some segmented category that will be of service to. The Planning and Process Management Division has been dissolved. No applause? I know there are a few of you that would applaud this. That doesn't mean that the project development process has been abandoned. We need more structure than we had before this was introduced. They'll be very flat. We don't need a lot of chiefs. And we want less meetings and more work. The last thing I'd say, which Elder Zabrowski's alluded to, we want to do a better job of integrating the missionaries into our workforce. I just want to say to the missionaries that are here and at the vault how much we appreciate you, and that we want your missions to be everything you've hoped they would be. And with the good relationship we have with the presidency and with the help of Preston and Dan, we're going to figure out how to utilize the talents of these great people better than we have. Many of these people come at the end of careers where they've really distinguished themselves. And where they have great talent, we need to exploit it better than we've done. They want to give. And I don't want a distinction to exist in any kind of a class distinction way between those of us who are here as staff and those who come as missionaries. In a way, I'm almost tempted to tell the missionaries just to take their badges off, because we're all one. And family history, actually, in their work with missionaries has actually progressed to the point where they have, in some cases, staff reporting to missionaries. And it's working very well. I don't want staff to ever feel like a missionary is going to displace you or bump you from your employment. That isn't a risk. But I do want us to view them as our equals, to be very courteous to them, and to employ them to the fullest extent that we can in this mixed workforce design that we have.
Bruce, you were shaking your head like you could answer that question.
About the religion?
Yes, or anything.
Well, we have. I was thinking earlier, that may have been when I shook my head. Interesting enough, we've had a family living in Kurdistan, in the Kurdish Republic, from Huntsville, Utah. A family with how many children, Paul?
9 children.
9 children. And they've lived there for about 3 years in perfect peace. They're known to be Latter-day Saints. They've had no problems. It's just a very stable part of Iraq, a safe part of Iraq. We've considered and have been asked by this Sister Kajal to do more there. And the only hesitancy we've had is that anything we do in Kurdistan will be viewed very negatively by the Turks. And we're moving into Turkey, so it kind of puts us in a little bit of a dilemma. One place we might, as Paul was speaking, I thought one place we might look at is the diaspora and trying to locate Kurds in the United States and in Europe and begin to teach them. I think it's a fertile ground that the time's come to look at.
Any comments or questions, brethren?
Fascinating.
Yes, thank you.
Rapidly advancing neurobiology, biochemistry, and gene therapy raise new opportunities and new questions. For example, should church members consider using new drugs or gene therapy to break addiction, counter homosexuality, help shy teenagers become more outgoing, or enhance student performance? The question of students using performance-enhancing drugs to concentrate during tests after studying all night is already here. Do any such drugs contradict the word of wisdom? Another question. Will new societal definitions of injured or impaired brain or moral functions invite church handbook explanations or explications regarding moral accountability? For example, as they may be related to baptism, church discipline, temple worthiness, for those potentially affected. In that light, consider briefly, if you would, please, 2 real-life cases involving accountability after head injury and stroke. The first involves a San Francisco Bay Area food plant manager who ran a plant making delicious salami. In a car accident, he suffers head injuries, which everyone says leave him a slightly different person. One day, inspectors find food safety violations at his plant, place his plant on probation, and say they will return to re-inspect in a month. When the food inspectors arrive a month later, the food plant manager is indeed waiting for them. The plant manager kills the food inspectors according to a careful plan. The issue? Has the plant manager's accident and head injury impaired his moral judgment such that the jury should not hold him responsible for murder? A second case. A grandfather serves as a church patriarch and is venerated in his family and community. He suffers a stroke, which seems to leave him a slightly different person. One day the grandfather fondles a grandchild. Both the child and the family are traumatized. The issue? Has the church patriarch's, the grandfather's, stroke and brain damage impaired his moral judgment such that he should be held accountable in a slightly or different way? In conclusion, a quote, science of moral sense seems a contradiction. It is worth monitoring, especially if it is used to explain away conscience, the light of Christ, or the Holy Ghost. In case you're interested, the jury found the food plant manager guilty. I don't know how the bishop and stake president helped the grandfather.
Though I can't remember any Latter-day Saints that were permanent members of his staff, it was fair to say that his staff in the Senate was church broke. In fact, not many months ago, his legislative director called me on the phone and he said, "Ralph, you haven't called us for 6 weeks. What are we supposed to be doing?"
Brethren, I'm honored to be in your presence. And so while I'm somewhat accustomed to speaking with United States senators and even presidents of the United States, I stand humbly before you because I know who you are, and I know my covenants, and I know the role that you play in this world in building the kingdom of God in Caesar's world. That's the title that I used as an address to your Public Affairs Committee the other day, a combination of committees, I assume. But building the kingdom of God in Caesar's world is a great challenge because the world could not be more secular, could not be more unbelieving, and perhaps in many ways the world could not be in a more calamitous condition. I would like to suggest to you, not as any definitive authority, but what I regarded as my role as one who regards his temple recommend as more important than an election certificate. So I met with President Wood and I told him I was being asked to run. And that I wanted to, but that I could not and should not do both things and would leave the decision to him. He thought for a minute and then he said, "Bishop, if you want to run, we will release you. If you do not run, we will fire you." In retrospect, I think he was a wise stake president. And there are many brethren, particularly in the Intermountain West, who are underutilized in the church, and maybe with occasionally a nudge would get them into public service. Because there is nothing quite as effective as when Ralph Hardy calls me and says, "We need a meeting in Rome, we need a meeting in Madrid, we need a meeting in Belgium." A U.S. senator can get those meetings. And the Latter-day Saints tend to excel in all kinds of professions, but not necessarily in the professions of government. And having them in there and knowing that their temple recommend is more important than their election certificate is of inestimable value in terms of what I have seen. And I must say that in caring about this principle, I know that the struggle you have with the issue of gay rights, and lest I be indelicate about this, I don't mean to be, but I can only imagine how tiresome an issue it is for you. Early in my Senate career, I had occasion to visit with President Hinckley, President Monson, and President Faust. Towards the end of that interview, I asked them if I could ask a question about this issue. I told them that I had been characterized in my campaigning as disliking gays and lesbians. I do not dislike them or anyone. And I wanted to know where the boundaries are. I told them, if you want to know my position on issues in relationship to culture, they could find them in my bishop's handbook. And those are how I voted. But I said to President Hinckley, I wouldn't understand why I couldn't be helpful to them on issues like housing and health care and employment and public safety. And I will tell you the good and the bad of what I learned. He told me those are fine and I should vote that in terms of my own Christian conscience, because no matter one's transgressions in the public square, we all need rights and we need protection of law. And so I was able to make at least some alliance with the gay and lesbian community, helping them on some issue, but making clear from the beginning that when it came to marriage, I would never be there for them. When it came to teaching this issue to children, I would always oppose them. That seems sufficient for a time. And this is the negative of helping. You will never please them. You can't win the argument with them, because ultimately what they want is the secular sanctification of their relationships in law. The problem with that is that marriage is an ideal that is certainly a commandment, but it is an ideal that teaches the public that there is an enduring value to the foundational organization of a mother and a father and a boy and a girl and a dog and a cat and a house. And when we mix that up and confuse that message, societies that I have observed, particularly in Europe, who change this law, they fundamentally change the incentives in relationship to marrying and building a home. So while I have made friends among the gay and lesbian community, they turned from me when I voted to make it a constitutional amendment to define marriage as one man and one woman. I think your audience is the larger American public, not the gay community. The larger American public agrees with you still in majority. And I believe that ought to be the focus of your words. That there is an enduring value and an importance beyond what society generally understands about marriage. And it's not about consenting adults alone. It's about the rearing and nurture of children and the raising of the next generation of Americans. I know it's hard to be called names, to be protested. I've lived with it for 12 years. And I know sometimes it might feel like maybe we ought to turn down the heat, and I think where you can, you should. And there's probably second guessing about the wisdom of the position that the church took in Proposition 8. But let me tell you, there's always two sides to a political story. There's opposition in all things. And while the members there have taken heat, and maybe our buildings have suffered some, the political world took notice of the church. That when it does stand up and its members deliver, it is a force. And there is an upside to that recognition in the powers that be in the world.
Senator, what are the concerns as you've been there in Washington that you think we ought to be most aware of? What are the forces that you're most concerned about as a senator that you think could really be difficult for us?
Well, one I mentioned, which is secularism that is fueled by socialism. I think that just is counterproductive to an environment that is receptive to missionary work. Secondly, I would say weapons of mass destruction in the hands of a fanatical branch of a great religion that believes their purpose on earth is not to gain a body and to learn to choose between right and wrong, but to die as a martyr. Probably by this year, Iran may well have, with their now, I think, 3,000 centrifuges, enough fissile material to create a nuclear bomb. They have in their battle plans, and some of this may be classified, maybe the 2009 data is classified still, but they have the rocketry to hit Israel.
Ralph, did you want to make any comments?
I think I've reflected my views in my introduction of the senator, and again, what I just can't stress what it means to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to have which we've had five temple recommend carrying high priest in the United States Senate, and a large number in the House of Representatives. What it means to the transaction of business, to have access, to be able to influence decisions, to reach beyond our shores. And as I said in my introduction, what Senator Smith has done, and I can say the same for our other brethren of both parties, it is of inestimable value to this church. And I hope that in the days and years ahead, that the miracle of these brethren being in Washington will be repeated, and that worthy brothers and sisters of this church in this country and in other lands will rise up and find ways to be in elective office and to be able to help carry the burden, because there is a political and economic component that is vital in how the church operates, and some of the critical gating decisions that are made as the church enters other countries, how it exists, what we can do in this country. I think there have been, and Elder Wickman is an eyewitness of this, that there are things that are miraculous that have happened for the church. And I go back to what I used to hear Elder Neil Maxwell say so often, that the Lord is in the details. And we see in the details and in government things happen that otherwise we would never think would happen, because of intervention that has taken place. And in this regard, Senator Smith has played a vital role, and it's have his
a point I would like to share with you, this experience that was as dramatic as anything I've had as a bishop or as a missionary in New Zealand. Ralph asked me to see if I could get an appointment with the the Indian ambassador of the United States, Ambassador Sen. I did, and they come immediately to a senator's office. Ambassador Sen is a very quiet and meek man, a very nice person. And I began the meeting with Ralph's permission, representing the United States in the growing India-U.S. relationship, sharing values like the freedom of conscience, freedom of religious free exercise. It was really important to the future between our nations, and then I represented that the church was not being treated fairly in India. And Ambassador Sen said, I know, and I was with Elder Oaks, and I was with President Hinckley, and I promised him I was going to do something. And he said, this is what I think. Just send your Indian converts to India. And I said, well, I don't know how many we have, and that's not a bad idea, but surely we can do better than that. The meeting broke up with him, I think, feeling guilty that he had not delivered on his promise to President Hinckley. He said, let me think on this, and he left my office. This was on a Thursday. On a Friday morning, I was putting my bag in my car to go to Dulles Airport to fly to Oregon. And I heard the phone ring, and Sharon was already in Oregon, and I was no one to answer it. And I got in my car, and I thought, surely it's the staff. I'll call them on the way to the airport. And as clear as you hear my voice, I heard, answer that phone. I got out and answered it. It was Ambassador Sen. He said, I apologize for calling so early in the morning, but I haven't been able to sleep all night. And I've got an idea. You send to me the visas that you need for your missionaries, and I will issue them over my signature, and we'll establish a pattern of dealing that will get around the India bureaucracy. And then he said, how many do you need, Senator? And I said, thinking in my mind, well, we had 200 missionaries in my mission. I said, we need 200. And there was a pause and a gulp, and he said, okay, send me 200. On the way to the airport, I didn't call my staff. I called Elder Hardy, and I hope you brethren know that Elder Hardy is a lawyer, but I don't know when he ever does any legal work. He works full-time for the church. And I said, Ralph, if there's any way you can go to the ambassador's home, he's expecting you, codify this as best we can. I believe we have a mission in India now.
Two.
It started from that meeting, and this is the way that you ought to use Mike Crapo, the way you ought to use Harry Reid, the way you ought to use Orrin Hatch and Bob Bennett. These are great men, these are great colleagues, and they're dedicated Latter-day Saints. And it was my privilege to respond, not often enough. When he would call, he didn't call enough, but when he did, we saw miracles.
We're very grateful to both of you, have great respect for both of you. We know both of you, and what you do and what you don't, which is equally powerful. So we... This morning, physical therapist that I work with, who also is posted at the hospital in Logan, said he has a patient, 27 years old, who has one tooth only. He's unmet. And he said that the woman comes to see him once in a while with about a 3-year-old girl. But just a wasted life.
We just said that we have a bishop who is a judge in Israel, and he has the scriptures and the handbooks, and that he would counsel with the individual and teach him about the word of wisdom, but the decision is there between him and the bishop and the Lord.
And that the church has no position.
The church has no position.
That is, the church has no position specifically on medical.
On medical.
But on marijuana generally.
No, on medical marijuana, yeah. That was his question.
President, when you raise the matter of meth, that opens a whole different world, because that young housewives can cook up on their kitchen burner. And you remember some years ago, I think Brother Alex Morrison was doing a lot to get into that in this community about how widespread, too widespread, that was along the Wasatch Front.
Robbie, our primary effort here was to have a religious freedom, and I think it's been covered well. You've crossed over, and I think they always will cross over to marriage, and you're chairman of the board of NOM, as well as your relationship here. As you look at Maryland and Minnesota and Washington, can you just give us a snapshot of where you think things are in that at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. The most powerful argument that the media runs on behalf of those who would redefine marriage is that it's inevitable. The redefinition of marriage is inevitable. Get on the right side of history. You'll be left in the dust with the bigots and treated as if you're Bull Connor unless you come along. Time after time when that's put to the people, whether in liberal states like California or Maine or Wisconsin, it's defeated. Conjugal marriage prevails. Most recently it prevailed by a 61-39 vote in North Carolina. This is a state that is trending more in the liberal direction, although it's a southern state. Lots of folks from the Northeast have moved down to get good, high-paying jobs down there. It's got a large student population in places like Durham and Chapel Hill. It was thought to be a place where a marriage referendum would actually lose. The other side poured an enormous amount of money in. We were being outspent down there by 3-1, I believe, Louis, something like that. And we were still able to win. And it was a state that President Obama carried last time. We were able to win it in a landslide. But each of those victories requires a campaign. And those campaigns require financial support. We don't need to spend at the level of our opponents. They can outspend us 3. I think they can outspend us 4-1, and we can still win. But we need to be enough in the game. We need the resources to be able to get our message out. We know the message that works, and it's basically just to tell the truth about marriage. So we know what works. We can do it. We can win as long as our side doesn't lose heart and lose hope, and by the other side's, back ourselves into the other side's belief that this is inevitable. We also need first-rate people. Now there, we're so fortunate to have Frank Schubert, who has run campaigns starting in California and just won by this landslide in North Carolina. And we have formed an organization, a company called Mission Public Affairs. You know about it, Elder Cook. And we hope the church will support Mission Public Affairs, become part of it, because you do need first-rate people in each of these places to win the battles.
There is a movement of mommy blogs that many LDS mothers are now participating in, some of them which have wide circulation and interest. They need to be writing about mothering and fathering and about the importance of religious freedom. That's the way the average member of the church, I think, begins to engage in this. There will be moments in time when a piece of legislation comes up to the Religious Freedom Caucus. They need to be able to call and know who to call. But this is a tool that will allow ordinary people to be heard.
And would you agree or disagree that we have an absolutely overwhelming resource with the rank and file Latter-day Saints, given what you just said?
I absolutely agree.
President, we have used our time up. We want to thank you for coming today. It's been most instructive. most inspiring, and telling us to get to work and do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elder Perry.
Thank you. Well, I began where we began. That is that on these issues we will not budge. That's understood. I think our membership understands that if it costs finances, costs time, and so on, I will do that, but we will not budge.
And we will fight.
We will fight.
Those older have less time to recover from market declines. In the church, 774,000 members are 65 years or older, about 8%. 317,000 members 65 and older constitute about 6% of the international church, which is younger on average than the church in North America. In the United States and Canada, 457,000 members are 65 or older, about 10%. What happens when a temple-married senior couple, husband aged 63 to 65 years old, planning to serve a mission, sees the retirement drop? According to the Research Information Division, if anticipated senior missionary service is delayed, intervening financial, health, or other family factors can make it difficult for some senior couples ever to serve. Mission expenses are difficult, of course, for senior couples to calculate. These expenses vary by location and country and unpredictably increase with a weak U.S. dollar. Many senior couples may feel the need to help children and grandchildren. As part of a general monitoring of financial and spiritual trends, would it be useful to track senior couples who ask to postpone serving, who ask for early releases due to rising financial challenges, or who request assignment changes to less expensive locations within their own mission boundaries? In conclusion, the heritage of the saints is to grow together by spiritual refinement through trial. Whether over the fence or across the world, each generation can be taught to prepare. And may it be useful to monitor financial and spiritual impacts on specific groups of members: children, young women and young men, young adults, or seniors. Today's update. Comments or questions?
I think you've convinced me. I'll delay my retirement.
I was chairman over at Beneficial for a number of years, and I looked at life insurance. And it amounted to this. They looked at charts, and they bet that I was going to live so long. I bet that I wasn't, so I started paying them money to prove it. That about what it amounts to?
It's a lot quicker to go to Las Vegas.
Jeffrey, for a happy note, why don't you quote
let's go to something like 9/11 now.
Jeff, can't you quote Samuel Johnson?
Well, I quoted Samuel Johnson to President Packer and Elder Oaks this morning, who said once that he tried to study philosophy once, but happiness kept breaking through. We hope we're in that matter.
Well.
And lastly, thank goodness we have stake presidents and bishops who are planning at the local level how best to respond with their people. The next level of planning would be wide-scale long-term emergencies such as economic depression or collapse, droughts, civil disturbances. And here we have, as our major response, our strategic reserves. And central to this would be our wheat. 8.7 million bushels stored around the United States and Canada based upon a criteria of providing for about 30% of the members. Beans, 11 million pounds of beans stored mainly in Burley. And we store enough beans to care for the children and the elderly, but not for all other people. Same with rice. And next we have the powdered milk, again for the needy, and we have diesel fuel to move, if we're able to, the product from the farms and from the other storage locations. Here we have a slide that shows where the 30 facilities are in the United States storing the 8.7 million bushels of grain. Next, in terms of response, for long-term emergencies, we have the food processing, the canneries, the milk plant, the granaries, etc., that process the flour. We have farm production. And here we have two different kinds of farms. We have welfare farms. We have about 53 farms in welfare. Most of the product all comes into the system. About 68,000 acres of farmland that is used to produce the wheat, the dry beans, etc. We produce enough wheat to rotate the storage once every 3 years. The second group is run by what we used to call a farm management company. FMC is now called Ag Reserves. And they have by far much more land. The productive capacity is really remarkable in this arm of the church. They have about 145,000 acres. They're now producing these products. And in addition to that, they lease out about 244,000 acres that could be converted into productive farmland. Next, on distribution, there are 6 Bishop Central storehouses in the United States. This is Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Indianapolis, Colton, California, Oregon, and Salt Lake. Distribution also, we have 36 trucks, 94 trailers, and the storage of diesel fuel at these strategic locations.
Could I ask a question related to that? When you talk about rotating the 3 years, does that go into the system and used, or is it just...
Most of that is sold on the open market.
The rotating portion.
Yes. Out of the silos.
There's not that much need internally.
As we look internationally, 6% of international members are temple married by age 30, and that's been declining over the last couple of decades. The implication of that is for us is significant. It's beyond what's happening to young single adults and becomes an issue about the establishment of the church as a multi-generational institution. The elements that would be required to have a multi-generational church include, first, retaining our young people through their youth and young single adulthood, having them marry in the temple, and then having them have children. Each of those 3 areas shows declining rates in the last couple of decades. We're having declining activity, we're having declining marriages in the temple, and the fertility rates are decreasing. It's difficult, as you all know, to find a companion. Internationally, particularly, about 70 active men per 100 active women across many of these countries. And beyond that, many of the women are more educated than the men. Sister Allred of the Relief Society Presidency came back from Central America. She just met with a large group of of women in this age group. Principals of high schools, doctors, lawyers, significant education. They couldn't find somebody in the church their equal, and in many cases the norms, men aren't willing to have the woman put them through school, as might be the case in North America. So significant problems in bringing them together that we want to talk about, at least try to address.
Bishop Burton just passed me a statistic that 72% of young adults are already inactive before age 20, which means it's happened in the Aaronic priesthood years. And my thought, President, as you were saying, is the best thing we can do for youth is to make their parents better parents.
Pirate mythology infuses popular culture. It was interesting to see some 300 movies featuring pirates. I didn't watch them all, but I noticed that there were that many. Treasure Island, Peter Pan, Abbott and Costello meet Captain Kidd, Errol Flynn and Captain Blood. Today's most famous pirate may be Disney's Captain Jack Sparrow, played by Johnny Depp.
Keep your guns on him, men. Gillette, fetch some irons.
Well, well. Jack Sparrow, isn't it?
Captain Jack Sparrow, if you please, sir.
You are without doubt the worst pirate I've ever heard of.
But you have heard of me.
Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy, as you know, has garnered an amazing worldwide box office of almost $2.7 billion. I show it because, though meant in fun, Captain Jack makes pirating appear good and traditional authority appear silly.
It ought to be mentioned that there was substantial money and resource that went from the coalition into the black and Hispanic communities.
That was very smart.
A lot of money was spent there getting to them. And their basic issue with the blacks was they didn't see it as a civil right. I mean, that was a big issue to them.
In some ways it offends them when it's as if it demeans their struggle. Gays are not profiled in the same way that African Americans have been, and they haven't been excluded from graduate schools and asked to drink water at a different fountain. Yes, Elder Rasmussen.
David, you commented that the Catholic vote came out 60% in favor of Proposition 8.
Yes.
Was an LDS vote taken so that we know how much of the LDS voted?
Not in any of the polling I've been able to get. We're not a large enough demographic to have a breakout that they would report with statistical confidence. So, for example, when I compared the California votes I gave you with Arizona and Florida, back to Elder Cook's question, there wasn't a large enough N in the sample in Arizona or Florida for me to do the same detailed demographic of age and race and so forth. There was a big enough N, and the margins were wide enough on things like Latinos and blacks that they and I am comfortable. But given the nature of the issue, you would need to do a much larger sample than 2,000 to get sufficient Latter-day Saints in the random sample to do it. But I think we can predict with some confidence that the Latter-day Saint vote on this would have been well above the Catholic vote. The charge that I think is an unfair charge is that Mormons determined the outcome of this election. They certainly didn't with their votes. I think they were very important with their dollars and their volunteers.
Current church policy permits Muslims to be taught and baptized in countries where there is broad, constitutionally protected religious freedom, provided the candidate has citizenship in one of these countries or a long-term visa, is pursuing long-term residence in a country where the church is established and freedom of religion is permitted, and has no known family members who would violently oppose or retaliate against the conversion. When these conditions are met, with careful supervision from the mission president, including specific instructions to the candidate regarding risk and other things, Muslim investigators may be taught and baptized. Please note, however, that the current policy also states that only Muslims who approach the church or who are encountered during routine proselyting may be taught. The policy specifically states that there should be no outreach programs directed toward Muslim populations or neighborhoods. The church is now present with organized units or humanitarian efforts in more than 170 countries and territories, represented here in blue. In the vast majority of these countries, Muslims could be taught and baptized under the current policy if encountered during routine proselyting activities. The countries represented here in green are where we are not proselyting Muslims. Although we do not keep records on the prior religion of our converts, the records of the church indicate that based on their place of birth and other circumstances, there are approximately 20 to 25,000 members who may have converted from Islam.
President, just a comment that I think will be of interest to everybody. We've got Al Jazeera here this week, and you're working with them, and Richard Hinckley's taking them through a guided tours, and he was looking at that. I think this was said once before, but Elder Ballard and I were in New York to see Fox News and meet with the Wall Street Journal editorial board, and Al Jazeera sent word through Ahmed, our public affairs, the African American there, that they really wanted to have a broadcast to the Arabic world. This was December of 2007. They were intensely interested that Mitt Romney was a Mormon. It was the last election, and they wanted to have somebody come on. I was quite reserved about doing that, but Elder Ballard asked, well, how many people would see it? And they said millions. And Elder Ballard said, I'll do it. And so we went down to Al Jazeera's studio, and they had a very respectful moderator there. And I got to listen as he had the interview with him. Elder Ballard basically went through a first lesson, first discussion in Preach My Gospel, based on the questions that were asked. And I listened to it, and they were supposedly translating what was going on, and Elder Ballard said, and Joseph Smith was a prophet, and what I heard come back was Arabic language that said something about Muhammad, which hadn't been said. I'm sure they said that. Of course, we know that there's no prophet but Muhammad. It was shown on December 23rd or 24th, 2007, to millions of people in a testimony under the first lesson, and I subsequently had when I was in Washington, D.C., a couple of years later, this man came up to me, this young man, he says, I heard Elder Ballard do that. I speak Arabic. I tried to find out what he was doing. I decided he was with the CIA because he wouldn't tell me what he was doing. But I asked him if he would get me an English transcript of what had been said in Arabic so that I could see what had actually ended up going out. And he sent that to me, and it really was a wonderful first lesson to millions of people over El Jazeera, December 23rd, 2007, or December 24th, 2007, in the context of, we want you to know what one Mormon candidate believes that is running for President of the United States. That was the context that went on.
Perhaps you are dismayed as I was by the January 16th New York Times headline, front page, which read, 51% of women are now living without a spouse. The story went on to say, up from 35% in 1950 and 49% in 2000, quote, probably for the first time, more American women are living without a husband than with one. Dismay came on two fronts. First, that so many women were living without a spouse, and second, that the article seemed to take some glee in proclaiming that many of these women, quote, were delighting in newfound freedom, end of quote. What's interesting is the story turns out not to be true. While marriage is under pressure, it is untrue that a majority of U.S. marriageable age women are living without a spouse. In typical laconic fashion, when the New York Times retracted or modified its story, it said simply that its earlier calculations were based on women, quote, 15 years and older. In fact, as you see, the 2005 census shows that 56.9% of women over age 18, a more marriageable age, are married, and 53% have a spouse present. Another example of media myth becoming fact is the now infamous New York Newsweek story, The Marriage Crunch. You may remember this. The data used was early data from Yale and Harvard researchers, and they projected that the chances of a 30-year-old white, college-educated single woman marrying were 20%. And we all remember the still quoted tagline, the chances that a 40-year-old woman would be married were, quote, she was more likely to be killed by a terrorist than to marry. That also turns out to be untrue. Also, as you see, U.S. Census data shows that the percentage of men and women over 18 never married is in fact still rising, from 26.8% to 28.2% for men and 19.4% to 21.6% for women in even only the last decade. We note that both total number of women and total number of women never married is increasing. The 21.6% over 18 never married translates into 24,318,000 individuals never married across all marriageable age groups. In terms of church implications, you've discussed in great detail that though we lag the world's trend, LDS men and women are marrying later and having fewer children. Indeed, separating marriage myth and fact may help our young LDS adults maintain the faith and hope they need as they seek and commit to marriage today. It's today's update. Comments or questions?
Thank you.
Good job.
Well, we're glad you improved everything.
Sometimes the glass is more than half full.
Yeah. Thank you.
Three possible church implications. First, technical attack. Are we sufficiently protected against industrial-strength cyber attacks by well-funded, capable countries or groups which probe the church each day? Second, personnel attack. Breaches often begin with a disgruntled individual on the inside, often in a lower-level position with access in a remote location. Private Manning reportedly became depressed after his homosexual companion left him and then lectured him. And on his Facebook page, Private Manning wrote, "I am not a piece of equipment." He said he could access sensitive documents, quote, because of weak servers, weak logging, weak physical facility, weak counterintelligence, inattentive signals analysis, ... a perfect storm. So, technical personnel. Third is the unintended. Do we have appropriate protocols in case of accidental loss or theft of a church laptop, an iPad, or a data drive with sensitive information? A question that's worth asking frequently, I think. In the end, this we do know, and the rebellious shall be pierced with much sorrow, for their iniquities shall be spoken upon the housetops, and their secret acts are the ones that shall be revealed. Comments? Questions?
But he is confirmed homosexual.
He is.
Has
Openly.
that been in the news?
Yes.
Yes.
New
York Times.
I missed that somehow.
Piece.
Just in the very beginning.
Yeah.
The reason I ask a question is not related to this presentation, but I'm suspicious that the news media cover up anything involving homosexuals when it would work to the disadvantage of the homosexual agenda and so on. And I just wondered if there was some of that in this.
It was in the collateral press, and New York Times covered it as well.
But right at the beginning.
Thank you.
Ex post moral hazard arises when an incident occurs and an insured party seeks more goods or services than they would have had they not been insured. In fact, I have a scholarly article by 3 economists that says, quote, American League batters have been hit by pitches 10 to 15% more frequently than National League batters, refused to bail out deeply troubled Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, or American International Group, AIG. This surprised many because the U.S. Treasury and Federal Reserve had recently, of course, stepped in to facilitate the sale of Bear Stearns. The American financial landscape is dramatically altered with the loss of these venerable, iconic institutions. Founded in 1850, Lehman Brothers had a 158-year institutional history. Lowered borrowing costs and loosened standards opened the way for many new homebuyers, some of whom did not initially qualify for home mortgages. Real home prices skyrocket. In September 2007, meltdown begins. The top 25 lenders, names we know such as HSBC Finance, New Century, Countrywide Financial, begin hemorrhaging on some $543 billion in tainted loans. And finally, the perfect response to what might be called the moral agency moral hazard. For we know that it is by grace that we are saved, after all we can do. Today's update. Comments or questions?
Very interesting. Thank you.
Very interesting.